Training is something NIOSH takes very seriously. NIOSH's Mike Brnich recorded this message for our town hall.
I'm Mike Brnich from the NIOSH Office of Mine Safety and Health. At some time in your mining career, you may be faced with a mine emergency. This might be a fire, an explosion, an inundation of water or gas, a major roof fall, or perhaps a combination of these. Regardless of the event, you will have to make critical decisions about what to do and how to proceed in order to reach safety. But before you can make these decisions, there are a few things you need to know. First, you need to know the layout of your mine and the locations of portals that lead to the outside. You need to know your mine's ventilation system and how air travels through your mine. You need to know your escape ways, where they are, how they're marked, where they lead to, and also the tactile signals you find on the mine lifelines. You need to know how to use the SCSRs your mine provides and also how to use the refuge alternatives that are available. You also need information, as much information as you possibly can gather about the event that you're facing. The more information you have, the better your chances are of making good decisions about what to do and how to proceed. Evacuation and escape are your first lines of defense. Try every possible means to get out of the mine. But if you find that evacuation is impossible, you may have to make an extremely critical decision, that being whether or not to seek refuge in a refuge alternative. Regardless of the type of event that you may face, you will have to make these critical decisions. If you have any questions, you can always ask your mine foreman, your mine safety director, or any other mine official. The more you know about your mine and the more information you have about the event, the greater your chances are of making good decisions, decisions that could help save your life.
NIOSH's Mike Brnich joins us on our panel today.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. I think a couple of additional points we can make to miners everywhere. First of all, as a miner, if you ever face a mine emergency like a fire, an explosion, major roof fall, or a combination of these types of events, this is going to be one of the most traumatic situations and most stressful situations you will ever face in your career as a miner. And so the more you know about your mine, the layout of that mine, the basics of the ventilation system, the more you know about your escape ways, refuge alternatives, SCSRs at your mine, the better prepared you're going to be to face that situation. Also, as Larry Grayson had mentioned earlier on, information is critical. The more information you have about what's going on, the more information you share about what you're going to be doing to meet the situation, the better off you're going to be when it comes to dealing with that event. Again, you're going to make some very critical decisions, and one of the most critical is going to be that decision of whether or not you're going to seek refuge. One of the things we've been doing at NIOSH is developing a series of training tools that can be used by trainers to teach miners various aspects of refuge alternative use. These include training exercises that can be used in the classroom for teaching decision-making techniques. Also, we're developing some additional materials that teach what we call expectations training, what it is like and what you can expect when you are in a refuge chamber that touches on some of the issues that Kathleen had talked about earlier. But again, training and knowledge of your mine are critical in these kinds of events.
Very good, thank you. Before we go today, we want to address post-traumatic stress syndrome. Kathleen has pre-recorded a piece on that very subject.
You're out of the mine. You're home. It's over. From a psychological standpoint, sometimes your journey is just beginning. You can expect to have continued symptoms after you've had a traumatic incident. For example, sleep disorder is normal. Many people report difficulty going to sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, and having nightmares. Some people report flashbacks. Change in eating habits is normal. Sometimes people will eat more, sometimes less. Sexual dysfunction. Change in alcohol consumption. Many times people will be drinking more after an incident than they did before. Sometimes people will report difficulty concentrating, difficulty making decisions. In fact, it's wise not to make any major decisions after you've had a traumatic incident. Sometimes people will be very irritable, angry, and sometimes people will get withdrawn. The key is that you can expect that there will be some behavior changes. Now, time takes care of a lot of these changes. But if you're continuing after 3 months to still experience difficulty sleeping, having flashbacks, irritability, and difficulty moving on with your daily life, that's the time to seek professional help. If it goes on up to 6 months, you could be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. But after that 3-month period, you want to find someone who is trained in disaster mental health. You're a normal person. You've had an abnormal experience. There's nothing wrong with you. You're reacting as a normal person would to a horrific experience. Counselors are trained in disaster mental health, and it's important that you go to a counselor who's been trained in that area. So what are some of the things you can do? First of all, reach out. People really do care, but you shouldn't be put in a situation where you're forced to relive the experience. Remember that your family has experienced this also. They have experienced it in a different way, but they've experienced it along with you. It's important that after you've had an incident that you take care of yourself, that you eat a balanced meal, that you make sure you get rest, that you try to exercise. Be extra careful and extra gentle with yourself. And finally, remember that time does heal.
Dr. Trikoffler, would you consider the stress that someone that we spoke about here in this video clip is akin to perhaps a soldier returning from the Gulf? We hear of that type of distress syndrome. Is it similar?
Actually, post-traumatic stress disorder was originally identified during the Vietnam War when it was diagnosed. So yes, the symptoms are very similar it's a response to a traumatic incident. Interestingly enough, as I was listening to that, an interesting point is that of all of our senses, smell lasts the longest in memory. Next is visual. So that, for example, a miner who has been in a mine fire where there were deaths can have flashbacks 20, 25 years later in smelling something burning.
So there is absolutely no shame that if someone has any issues from any incident, must get help.
It's something you have no control over. It's a natural response. It's a normal person in an abnormal situation, and it is very important to utilize someone who is trained in disaster mental health. Most mental health professionals are trained in psychopathology, mental illness, and that's true in rural areas in community mental health. So it's important to be with someone who has had disaster mental health training. There are short-term symptoms and there are long-term symptoms. Sometimes the short-term symptoms will move into long-term. I did mention those in the clip. There are a variety of short-term symptoms, particularly sleep disorder is normal, denial of the incident, withdrawal, depression, anger, acting out, alcohol consumption, sometimes relationship issues. The most critical time, and this came from research after 9/11, is 6 months to a year after an incident. They have found that the majority of suicides, for example, and we had an example of this in mining in Sago, come at approximately the 6-month period of time. So it's extremely important to monitor. It's very important to have this kind of information available pre-planning. As part of your emergency plan. It should be part of your training so that when people are in this situation, they can understand some of the things that they need to do and that it's normal. That's okay.
Very good, Dr. Trikoffler, thank you. Let's talk one more time here to Dr. Larry Grayson again. Have you ever encountered anyone with symptoms from being within the mine accident or incident?
Oh, yes, and I have family members, as a matter of fact. One of them quit right away, and another had worked at a mine, and there were recurring bad conditions, we'll call them, and after a period of time just couldn't cope with the situation of these bad conditions recurring all the time. So he left the mine as well.
I see. And we were looking at some of the safety issues. Let's address Jeffrey here. You see miners with their breathing apparatus on. Of course, it's a bad idea to panic or take that out. Isn't that correct?
Exactly, and I'm sure Don points it out as far as the training visuals, videos, virtual reality type of training is very important. But not only can it teach good things, but also it can tell people what not to do. And I'm sure Don points out that when someone puts a self-rescue on, you don't take it out to talk when you're going through smoke. That's one of the worst things you could do, and I'm sure that's pointed out in the training. The other thing that I could add is that in MSHA, we've added refuge alternatives into our training for our managers through Mine Emergency Response Development, or MERD training. And we basically built the refuge alternatives into MERD problems for our command and control people. And that along with the mine rescue teams, that are normally trained with the MERD, work together.